All right, we're just going to give this one more minute to let a few more people come in. Everybody getting settled, grabbing your coffees, your snacks. It is lunchtime. All right, well, it's 12 o'clock, so in the interest of time, we're going to go ahead and get started, and Catherine's just going to keep letting people in as they come in. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for the first ELA webinar of 2024. So glad to be gathered here with all of you today. If you have not done so already, please mute your microphone until the presentation is concluded and the Q&A has begun. Before we start, some quick housekeeping. First, at the end of this presentation, please use the link that will be provided in the chat to complete the webinar evaluation. Additionally, head over to the ELA website to RSVP for the March Mid-Atlantic meetup at Kind Earth Growers. Light housekeeping today. Now, what we're all here for. Ginny Stibolt, a lifelong gardener with an MS degree in botany, faced new challenges when she moved to Northeast Florida in 2004. Undeterred, she immersed herself in Florida-centric gardening, documenting her experiences in a monthly column for the Florida Times-Union and later transplantedgardener.com. Ginny's practical insights, tested in her own yard, focus on sustainable landscaping and vegetable cultivation with her husband, Dean Avery. As the former garden writer for Vero Beach magazine, she gained recognition for her contributions. An active member of the Florida Native Plant Society, Ginny advocates for native flora and encourages participation in local chapters and educational events. Her commitment to learning is evident at the Society's annual conference, where she continues her exploration of her adopted home state. Ginny is the author of 5 books and the co-author of Climate Wise Landscaping. Here to speak to us on Climate Wise Landscaping, it is my joy and pleasure to introduce Ginny Stibolt.
Thank you very much. It is my pleasure to join you, and I think you'll be surprised at okay, share. Yeah, so I will start the slideshow. All right, does that look good? Everybody see it?
Not quite. No, we are not seeing your screen.
Okay. So I guess I did not share the screen correctly.
That's all right.
All right. All right. Entire screen.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
And then don't forget to click on the little window where you see all of us.
Oh, okay. That's what I was missing. Okay. All right. And now I start the slideshow. How's that?
We are still not seeing your screen. So you're going to come into the share screen, select full screen, click on the little window, and then click share.
Okay. I'm sorry. This is the first time I've done a Google Meet. Okay.
No worries. Thanks for sticking with us, folks. Hope you understand. I'm sure we all understand. It's 2024. We've all been in the battle with.
Pick the little screen and share. Okay.
There we go. And now we're seeing. Yep.
Okay. All right, good.
Hide on that little banner. And then we are all good. Take it away, Ginny.
All right. Thank you so much. So climate-wise landscaping was actually Sue Reed's idea, and she lives in Massachusetts, in Northwest Massachusetts. And she called me because we had been working on other projects together online, and we were co-bloggers and that kind of thing, to get me to help her do this. I at first said no because I was writing another book, but I called her back an hour later. I said, no, I have to do this with you. So it was an interesting project in a number of ways. First, because when you're thinking about gardening and landscaping, when you consider climate, things are a little different. And we were very pleased that New Society Press in British Columbia was able to get Doug Tallamy to write the foreword for our book. And so he wrote a very nice foreword and ended with the recommendation that if you need to help the planet, then you need to read the book. So that was very nice. So here are Sue Reed and myself, and it took us a couple of years to write the book. Now, the goals of this presentation is emphasizing actions, things that you can do, things that you can do with your community, in your community, and to provide some background on the importance of some of the topics that we included in the book, and to point out some of the aspects of climate change in relationship to gardening and landscaping that you might not have thought about. And we had to rethink some of our assumptions. All right, and when it comes to environmental problems, there's a lot of non-helpful hand-wringing. So I got this meme in my Facebook feed a couple of years ago, and it talks about how bad junk mail is, but it doesn't say what you can do about it. It doesn't say, be sure to recycle what you get, or you can unsubscribe from email, not from emails, that too, that's junk, but unsubscribe from people who are sending you things, or you can emphasize that you would not use trees for your junk mail, so that you might use hemp or some other materials that could be recycled or something. So the problem with a lot of the environmental issues is that there is nothing to do. There are no actions. And so Sue and I, had a very strong preference to have actions, things that you can do. So each action would accomplish at least one of these three missions: to help landscapes become more resilient, so as climate changes, that they can still look good and not have everything die, and to help wildlife survive climate change. And there are things that you can do in the landscape that will actually mitigate climate change. And one thing we did not do was debate climate. We didn't go into what was the cause. We didn't debate whether it was happening. We did have one of our five primers. These are little set-asides in the book that delve into some deep science that you can skip if you want to, but climate change was one of those. And we talked about chemicals and how water works in plants and why native plants are important, and then also soil. And we had 10 chapters basically, and I'll go over those as we go through. But it was as I said, an interesting project. Now we started with lawns. And we did this because the easiest, the most impactful action that you can take is to rethink the high maintenance, high poisoned lawn and over irrigated lawn. So this makes the most impact, and it can save you money. So 30 to 60% of our tap water is used on landscapes, and particularly lawns. I mean, what a waste. And we have a whole another section on water, which I'll get to in a moment. So we'll save water by that. And it's ridiculous, especially here in Florida, how much money people spend on their lawns just to have it. And then in the winter, and I'm in North Florida, so we actually do have a winter, when the lawn goes dormant, people keep they put winter ryegrass seed over their lawns so that if the summer lawns that we have down here, the St. Augustine grass, it will still be green because we've got the winter rye that the lawn care companies have to mow. So the first thing you can do to have a more sustainable landscape is to stop all of the insecticides and the fungicides and the herbicides, whether they're organic or synthetic. Stop all the synthetic fertilizers and the over irrigation, and as I said, the overseeding. So what happens when you do that is that you would have more than just grass growing in your yard. So you would have other kinds of plants. These are plants that are in my lawn. So I've got violets, I've got asters, I've got lawn rain lilies here, and I've got toadflax, and I've got St. John's wort. And the other thing about not poisoning your lawn is that the lawn is safe for us, our kids, and our pets 100% of the time. And the other part about maintaining the lawn is that you would mow it at the highest level, and you would mow much less often. And since you're not fertilizing with synthetic fertilizer, then you would find that it doesn't grow as fast, so that you would, have a much less of a number of mows per year. But then to make it easy to mow, that you might have a nice even edge here and no vertical surfaces, so you don't have to go back with power tools to finish off the job. So you'd want to replace as much lawn as you can with wild spaces and butterfly gardens, and that would provide better habitat for the birds particularly, and the food that the birds eat, like bugs. So sustainable lawn care also does this. So when you are not poisoning the soil with the fungicides and the insecticides, then the soil will store more carbon because it will have more time for the inhabitants of the soil to work on it. And also you would save your heavy footprint by the manufacture and transport of those poisons and those fertilizers. And the reduced irrigation not only saves water to save our aquifers, it also saves energy, which we'll talk about in a minute. And the diverse lawn plants support the butterflies. And because you're mowing less often, then you have a reduced power use of power tools. And you would have, again, all kinds of different plants that take to mowing, and clover is one. And since clover is a legume, it actually fixes its own nitrogen, so it enriches the soil. And if you do have yard machinery, you could go to battery-powered machinery so that this is less pollution. And yes, the batteries do also use energy, but the energy from our electricity is much cleaner than the 2-stroke or 4-stroke engines of gas-powered tools. And yes, I know that there were problems with the rare elements on the batteries, but overall it's better for the climate not to be running those inefficient engines that pollute as much as a 100-mile ride in a car. So our next section was trees and shrubs. And the trees are particularly important, and this is actually an American elm tree in Amherst, Massachusetts, that did not get hit by the Dutch elm disease. And so they've been studying this tree to figure out why it was able to resist that fungal disease that killed most of the other American elms. But the trees cool the air, and they sequester carbon because almost all of what is in a tree is carbon based. And with their roots, they stabilize the soil. And of course, the trees support wildlife in many ways. I'm hoping that you know about Doug Tallamy and his quest to get people to plant more trees so that there are more caterpillars, because a pair of chickadees needs 6,000 to 9,000 caterpillars to raise one clutch of young. Now, the trees are often called the bones of the landscape. And if you plant, but to plant trees, if you're buying trees, you would buy small specimens that are not topped, that are locally grown, and they will cost less money, but they also cost less money to get them to you than the trees that are too large, that have been held in containers for too long, and they might have a better chance of survival. And we need to take care of our existing trees. The city of Baltimore puts a figure on what a tree in the city is worth by all the pollution that it clears, all the oxygen that it produces, and that kind of thing. And then if you have single trees, then you should build groves or non-lawn ecosystems around them, and that's better for the tree, and it's better for the wildlife, and it makes a more wind tolerant and more drought tolerant grouping if you have shrubs and bunching grasses around what used to be a single tree in the yard. All right, and here's an example of a tree that you shouldn't buy. This is a magnolia, which is native here in Florida, but it's too big. It's like 10 feet tall. It's been held in a container for too long. It's been topped. You can see this top. So there's 3 leaders here, maybe even 4, and you're going to have to choose one to have a strong tree. It's probably not from Florida stock. It's probably grown in North Carolina or something. It's got a 3-inch caliper, which is the diameter of the trunk, at 6 inches above the root flare. And it's going to be pot bound. So this is a bad investment to buy a large tree. And the landscape advice that we've been given all these years is buy the largest tree you can afford to make the biggest impact. And that is exactly the wrong thing to do. Buy small, untopped trees that have not been held in the containers too long. But if you're buying a containerized tree or a containerized shrub, then the best thing to do, and this is tough love for a tree, and this is against everything that we have heard from gardening experts, is that you need to rinse the roots so that you get rid of all that rich growing medium and all the fertilizer balls that have been in that container, because you want the roots to go out. You want the roots to go out and not to coil around in the planting hole. So you want to rinse the roots, stretch them out in all directions. Don't put any amendments in the hole. Build a mound around the edge of the planting hole so that when you water it, and you have to water it every day for several weeks because this is hard on the tree, and the tree will get used to whatever your soil is. And here in Florida, our soil is notably lousy, but having all that rich medium in the root ball, and if you put compost and other fertilizers in the planting hole, the roots will stay right there in the planting hole and not stretch out. And to get more information on that, go to Linda Chalker Scott's website. It's called informedgardener.com. She's at the University of Washington, and she has a whole section on why rinsing the roots is a better option. She has a science behind it. So Informed Gardener also has a lot of other horticultural myths as well. So it's a really interesting site where the science and gardening meet. But here's why you need to rinse the roots. This is a copper copper beeches that were planted along this thruway, and I think this is in Oregon. And the people who planted them did not remove the baskets around the tree, probably so that the roots would not disturb the road or the sidewalk. And they probably grew there for 20, 25 years, and the person who planted them probably thought he did a pretty good job, because look how beautiful they are, until they choke themselves off, because you do not want circling roots for that tree. So why do you bare root the trees? You find the root flare, which should be above the ground level, no volcano mulches around the tree. Find those circling roots and correct them, and get rid of all that non-native soil. What I do with the rich growing medium when I plant a tree is I put that rich growing medium in my compost pile, so then it gets absorbed into that. Now, the thing that the trees and shrubs do is they cool the landscape, and this is not only because of shade, but also because of transpiration. And you want to maximize their cooling with thoughtful planting strategies. So this is a photo of Sue's house, Sue Reed's house up in Massachusetts, and she's got service berries in front of her house. That looks closer in the photo than it actually is, about 10 feet away from her house. So in the summertime, then the front of her house, which is on the south side, gets shade. But in the wintertime, since it's a deciduous shrub, the leaves fall off, and then she gets the solar heating. So you can think about what the trees and shrubs do for you for that for that purpose. All right, now trees in our local landscapes add to the global population. So all of the water that is evaporated into the air from a tree, and an oak tree on a hot summer day will evaporate or transpire about 400 gallons of water. And for every gram of that water, if it's 68 degrees Fahrenheit, then 585 calories of heat are lost from the atmosphere. So the trees not only shade, they actually cool the water. And all that water vapor that goes into the atmosphere then rains back down on us. And so if the trees are cut, like when they cut out big forests and stuff like that, then the water vapor is not going up into the air, which means that we're going to have more droughts. And so there's global droughts around the world. And part of it is due to tree cutting, because we need that water vapor in the air. So when you have more trees in your landscape and in your community, the community will actually be cooler, which is one of the ways that we, as gardeners and landscapers, can actually mitigate global warming. All right, so water. So the climate change can cause too little water or too much water. So when we have unusual droughts or unusually large storms here in Florida, we've had some really huge hurricanes that have stayed around for much longer than they used to. So a climate-wise landscape needs to deal with both too much water and too little water. And if you went to UMass, this is the church, the chapel, and the lake by the chapel that was there when I went to UMass years and years ago. It's still there. So the thing about water, and we talked about this in a minute ago, is that when you reduce the use of tap water, both inside and outside, you not only save water, and water is a limited resource. It's important that we preserve it and not waste it on lawns. But the amount of energy needed to extract the water from the wells or the aquifers or wherever, to treat the water and to deliver the water to our taps with enough energy so that we can take a shower, with enough force so that we can take a shower, it's a huge amount of energy. So when you save the use of tap water, you are actually reducing greenhouse gas emissions because you are saving energy that would be needed. And so normally to get that water pressure, that the water is pumped up to the top of water towers. And that costs energy. So when you can reduce the use of tap water, then that not only saves the water. I mean, this is one of the ways that we had to rethink what we're doing. All right, and so when we're as gardeners, we need to create mostly drought-tolerant landscapes. And so most drought-tolerant plants use, drought-tolerant plants use various strategies, such as this Pine Hill milkweed, which was in my neighborhood. It's a beautiful milkweed, and it's got very thick, waxy leaves, and that's quite normal for a drought-tolerant plant. Or they might have big roots, or they might have other forms of reducing the water that they need. And so when you're planting an area that is going to be drought tolerant, you want to plant the plants not spaced out but closely grouped. And you would mulch it only with organic materials, and you would not have very much mulch showing because you want them planted closely together. And you want to allow it to go to seed and let it establish itself. This is a landscape in Texas, in one of the Texas state parks, with the lupin, or as they call them down there, bluebonnets. All right, and then if you do have plants that need moisture, and here we've got a swamp mallow and some horsetails, then this is planted in the Highline Park in New York City. And so these are grouped together so that this garden area might be near one of the water fountains that doesn't have a drain. When the water that trickles away is not a waste product, but it is then used to create a moisture garden. So that you would want them near water features so that water is available without extra irrigation. So you would want to design landscapes so that most of the plants, once they're established, can live mostly with rainfall, your local rainfall. And you would adjust the irrigation. This is on a military base here in Florida where they took out the lawn and they put in dyed cypress mulch, which is not climate-wise mulch, because they're taking down whole forests to create this cypress mulch and then dye it. They did not take out the irrigation. So they're watering the mulch because they have a non-lawn landscape, and they have weed barrier cloth underneath it, but they have to go in and take the weed barrier cloth out because the weeds come up through it anyway. So this is, you need to adjust, and mulch-only landscaping is never a good idea. But you might want to consider, if you're growing vegetables, using drip irrigation instead of overhead irrigation, because that saves water. And you might want to put in temporary drip irrigation if you're planting a whole group of plants at one time so that it's easier to keep them watered. And a rain gauge is always a good idea. It's always good to know how much rain you have so that you can adjust your irrigation to suit your rain. And climate-wise landscapes soak up almost all of the rainfall most of the time. I have 6 rain barrels. These are rain barrels in my yard. And in Florida, we get about 50 inches of rain, but we have 7-month dry season. So we have a 5-month wet season when we get 60 to 70% of our rain in 5 months. And that's also called the hurricane season. So the rain barrels come in handy, especially for growing vegetables, because the best vegetable growing season here in Florida is in the winter when it's dry. So you can use the rain, absorbing the rain water, instead of letting it go into the storm drains, means that there'll be less pollution, and the water quality in your nearby storm drains, from your nearby storm drains, would end up being lessened, so that there would be less of that water going into the waterways. I have extreme detail on building rain barrels, and actually rain gardens as well, on my blog, greengardeningmatters.com. And if you go to the resources page, there is a listing by category. So this would be under R for rain. So these 3 rain barrels all have bottom fittings so that they come out to one faucet, spigot, and they all fill up together and they all empty together. And it's on an elevated platform, so I have a hose that I can use for watering my edible. All right, and also rain barrel water is particularly important for your plants, because not just your plants in your yard, but also your plants that are in containers inside, because rain barrel water does not have chlorophyll, or not chlorophyll, chlorine or other purifiers. So it doesn't kill the microbes in the soil. And for healthy plants, we need the microbes in the soil. So the rain barrel water is perfect for wetting the compost piles, because it doesn't kill the microbes that are doing the work in the compost piles. Then you find other ways of using it, pre-rinsing veggies and rinsing hands and gloves and tools. So that it's an interesting project to have a rain barrels. Here is a large dry well we put in, because it was a spot where we wanted to put in vegetable gardens, and then when it rained, it just sat there. I live in a county called Clay County, and there was a band of clay in our yard that we didn't know about. We thought it was all sandy, but it wasn't. So it collected water there. So we built this dry well, which would help sequester the water on our yard so that it does not go into the storm drain. So I've got these perforated pipes with the socks that made donuts out of them, filled the donuts here, put weed barrier cloth on the geotextile cloth on the outside so that they stayed in, put in clean gravel, put more on the top, and then put the sod on top. So this dry well soaks up the water, but we can walk on it. It doesn't show in the landscape, but it does help with the puddling in that area where the water was collecting. And rain gardens slow down the flow of stormwater and keep it so that it soaks into the soil. And again, on my blog, on the Green Gardening Matters, I also have several articles on rain gardens and how to build them. Some are small, some are large. The swale, LaSalle Bioswale was a large community project in Jacksonville. And they made a big deal out of it, and it had sponsors and everything, but it was an interesting project to get the water from the streets. It had curb cuts so that the water from the streets, instead of going into the St. Johns River that goes by Jacksonville, it would soak into the ground. I built a rain garden here. This is a downspout near my front porch, and that was it. So I built a rain garden outside of it. It's a small rain garden. It's been enlarged since then. So I put in a dry well, covered it with stones, and then it had various moisture-loving plants that were around it. And here in Florida, for our rain garden plants, we have a problem because we have that 7-month dry season. So things like cardinal flower, which are native here, can't be used in a rain garden because the rain gardens get too dry in the winter. So when we sequester water, we reduce the water pollution. Okay. We need to rethink water. This was in Singapore, and they had these upside down umbrellas for a sidewalk cafe. and they acted as a gutter for the building. And the water went down the tubes here. And I talked to a guy who was worked in the building, and he said that the water goes into a tank, and they use that tank for flushing the toilets in the building. So this is one kind of rethinking that we can do to make better use of our rainwater. Okay, so we also talked about ecosystems, and every yard should be part of the larger fabric of the region. So we need to create ecosystems in our yards. And this helps wildlife survive. We don't use poisons, or certainly not landscape-wide poisons. So you can, when you build habitat for plants, and with habitat with plants for the animals, then you enhance the biodiversity, and you develop wild patches. Like the last 10 feet, you could put in stick piles or other kinds of things that create habitat and for insects and birds that would allow them to survive, where if you have lawn in every square inch, then it just doesn't work for the critters. So, and the other thing to think about is when you have a butterfly garden, you're not just after the butterflies. You also want to have the larval food for those butterflies so that the caterpillars can survive. And when the caterpillars can survive, then the birds can survive, as we talked about. All right, we have a section on soil. And when we're gardening, we want to minimize the soil disturbance and avoid compacting the soil if possible. We want to build compost, and you want to cover the soil. So we have a little sidebar in the book here on how does soil store carbon. I have a little lesson here on photosynthesis. So photosynthesis takes carbon dioxide, water with energy from the sun, creates sugars with oxygen as a leftover, and that's another reason you need larger plants like trees, because it produces oxygen and cleans the air. So anything that absorbs the sugars, terrestrial in the terrestrial ecosystem, one way or another, we and the caterpillars or the fungi or whatever, they absorb sugars one way or another. They take in oxygen. So we've got the sugars, we've got oxygen, we get energy for life, and the leftover is carbon dioxide and water. So photosynthesis and respiration are equal and opposite reactions. So what builds up the carbon in the soil is the sugars, and then the parts of the plant and the animals that eat them are in the soil, and they're stored in the soil in one way or another. And the more of that organic material in the soil, the more carbon it will store. And worldwide, the carbon storage in soils is about 4 times greater than the carbon that is stored in all the plants on the terrestrial ecosystems. So we have to stop treating our soil like dirt, is the method for that. So this is my left hand here, and this is in a tropical rainforest in Costa Rica. So this was a fresh cutaway, and the forest soil in a tropical rainforest is very thin. You would think it'd be larger, but it's not. And so what happens is that the metabolism of the whole ecosystem is very high, and you have all the rain. So it seems weird that you would have such a big, diverse ecosystem and would have such lousy soil. So this is what we want to avoid in our yards, is to have much thicker soil than this. So we would have nice microbe activity, we'd have worms and other soil organisms, and again, we would want to reduce the disturbance. And we can reduce the disturbance by not doing seasonal plantings. So this is de rigueur for all the communities in Florida. They have rows of plants that are not native and they're in bloom, and then a few months later they dig them out and then they put in another row of plants that are all in bloom, and then another one. And so 3 times a year, or maybe 4 times a year, all of that soil is disturbed over and over again. So we need to reduce the seasonal plantings and plant perennials and self-sowing wildflowers instead, so that the soil has a chance to be undisturbed. And you can reduce the soil disturbance with better weed management, so you can cut off weeds or pull them out with the least amount of disturbance. And then you would cover the soil with organic mulch, but mostly plants. No weed barrier cloth. It doesn't work in anything but an arid climate. In an arid climate, you can use weed barrier cloth, but it does not prevent weeds. It does not help in any way. There's a heavy footprint for manufacture and transport. The roots grow right through it. So here's a plant in my yard, and the previous owners had put lava rock on top of the weed barrier cloth, and the weeds get started in the lava rock and right through the weed barrier cloth. And then when you try to pull it up, it's a mess. So weed barrier cloth does not work for this. Now, we use it in the dry well to keep the soil out of the rocks, but doesn't work to prevent weeds. And then we have a section here on planning and design in here. So you want to create energy-wise landscapes and fire-wise landscapes and flood-wise landscapes. So if you're in a fire-prone area, you could have a fire in your neighborhood, but you could reduce the ability of a fire, not a huge fire, but a ground fire, from spreading into your yard by taking out the ground vegetation and trimming up the trees. So for 30 yards or 30 feet around your house, you can reduce the fuel for the fire. And you can have trees, but they need to be trees that are high, that have high branches. And water features also help with fire. And if you have shoreline buffers, that reduces the damage from storm surges. And it's been recently shown that living shorelines actually do much better than hard shoreline treatments. And the book I'm working on right now, we just turned it in for peer review, is on living shorelines for Florida. So that will be actually my 7th book. So we're anxious I have 3 co-authors, and 2 of them are Sea Grant agents that teach people, or contractors, how to put in living shorelines. So it's been an interesting project. So I'm anxious to see what the peer reviewers say. But yeah, living shorelines, very important. We have a whole section on herbaceous plants and how, and this is somebody's front yard in Seattle. While it's not all native, it's still totally no lawn. And so herbaceous plants can be used very effectively as a replacement for lawns. So yeah, use long-lived non-fussy plants, so bunching grasses and that kind of thing. And allow your plants to go to seed so the birds have something to eat. This goldfinch was in the Lurie Garden in Chicago. But we have been programmed as gardeners to want this. So you got non-native plants in full bloom that are not terribly expensive each time you buy them, but you're supposed to take them home and do seasonal plantings, and then 3 months later you come back again. And 3 months after that, you come back again. And many of these plants are treated with systemic insecticides so that the plants look good on the shelf. But this is the last thing that you want in your butterfly garden, because it's going to kill the caterpillars and it's going to kill the butterflies. So don't buy plants with the systemic insecticides. And you should know that native gardens are not wild. They do need care. Actually, I wrote a whole book on that. It's called The Art of Maintaining a Florida Native Landscape. They're not wild. And when we have native gardens, we need to make them look civilized so that the neighbors know that we have these native plants and it's not a pile of weeds. Maybe we need some signage about it. And again, this is the High Line in New York City, and it looks like a meadow garden instead of being on the west side of Manhattan. And as climate-wise landscapers, we need to support our native plant societies so that we can make native landscapes the new normal instead of ones that have the marigolds and petunias. And we need to remove the invasives. And so kudzu is an example of a terrible invasive. It was brought here on purpose. It was recommended as erosion control for roadsides, and it turns out that it was the vine that ate the south. And so we need to get this out of here because they're not controlled by their normal insect and other herbivores that they are in their native habitats. We talk about urban issues, and that in cities there can actually be quite a bit of infrastructure that is built in there for nature. And the High Line in New York City and the Leary Garden in Chicago are perfect examples of native gardens, or mostly native gardens, that are in urban areas that have actually improved the neighborhoods. And we can design cool roofs and rooftop rooftop habitats. So here, again, here is the High Line. It's a beautiful raised railroad bed that was abandoned that is now managed as a mostly native landscape, and it is extremely popular. So even in very narrow yards, we can still put in natives, we can still support butterflies, and we can do so beautifully. Now, one thing we didn't think about when we started thinking about the book is that for every pound of food that you grow or buy from a locally grown outfit, that it offsets up to 2 pounds of greenhouse gases, mostly transportation. But also food waste. 30% of commercial agriculture food waste is a huge portion of that. It takes a lot of energy to grow food. And if 30% of it is wasted, that's ridiculous. So support your local food, people. And if this is a harvest from my garden, but grow your own food, and you can do so. This is a community garden in Massachusetts, and it's beautifully done, and people grow their vegetables, and it's not in their yards because this is an apartment complex. You can use raised beds, because if you use raised beds like this, then you're not disturbing the underlying soil. So this is in my yard, and I use raised beds with outside, so I can configure them any way I want each time I plant a crop. Grow more woody fruit crops, or fruit trees, that kind of thing, or more perennial crops like chives, and we have garlic, meadow garlic here that's also another perennial that you can grow. And if you're using hydroponics, it uses less water, about 1/3 of the water, than soil-based crops. And here is a rooftop garden where you can grow food on the rooftop garden. So these are all ways to save water, and be more efficient when you're growing food. And outside of your garden, then you can support locally produced food with CSAs or farmers markets. And if you know what they are, you can also eat the weeds. These are actually female Italian zucchini flowers. Now, you couldn't find that in a grocery store because it's too tender. It would not handle well. But you can find interesting produce like this in your farmers markets. And again, meadow garlic is native to almost all of the eastern North America, and it's an allium, so it's related to onions and garlics. It's got flat leaves, not hollow like chives, so it's on the garlic side. And so I have a section of my vegetable garden that has the meadow garlic in it, and it comes up, it dies back at the end of the summer, and it's just coming back up again. When you're using materials in your landscaping, we talk about the carbon footprint and the potential for reusing materials and that kind of thing to make the materials that you use in your garden climate wise. So green landscaping, climate-wise landscaping is important because even though what we do in our yards may not seem significant, there's millions and millions of landscapers and gardeners. And it's our responsibility to help the world for future generations. Okay, I have one ask for you. Actually, it's a PowerPoint slide that Marjorie Shropshire and I put together on why native landscapes are important. And you can download it from the Florida Native Plant Society. It's listed under resources under downloadable documents. It's a free PowerPoint, that's 10 minutes with a script on why native plants are important. So show it to your homeowners association and garden clubs, anybody who will listen. When it downloads as a PDF file, but on that PDF file is a link to the PowerPoint. And this is for Florida, but if you want to look at it, then you could create a similar PowerPoint for something that has pictures of your local landscape. This is actually in a huge HOA called the Villages in Florida, and almost all of it has manicured lawns, but there is now a Native Plant Society group there. All right, for climate-wise landscaping, there is now a second edition. It's been published by University Press of Florida because New Society decided to stop publishing it. So University Press of Florida has published my other books, so they redid it. We have a new cover, and notice this time it actually has native plants in it. And on the first cover, we asked for the second photo to have a pollinator in it, but if you look at it, the pollinator is so tiny you can't even see it. So here we go again. So thanks very much, and I will stop sharing my screen and ask if you have any questions.
And if you have any questions for Ginny, which thank you, Ginny, for such a fantastic, fantastic presentation. If you have any questions, feel free to come off of mute or drop them in the chat, and we'll be happy to read them out for you. Sharon B., I see you have a hand raised. Go ahead and come off of mute and ask away.
Hey, are you able to hear me?
Yes.
Yes, we are.
Great, thank you. Having spoken with homeowner groups and so forth about reducing lawn and the benefits of native plants, one of the things I think is most difficult to contend with is that homeowners know how to take care of a lawn, or they know how to pay someone to take care of their lawn. And there's a real lack of expertise in doing anything else. And so I always advocate to start small and little bit by little bit, but do you have any other tips if you get that pushback as well, that I can pass along to people.
Yeah, well, that's why I emphasize the native plant societies or the wild ones, if you have that, so that as a group that you would have more effect than just one person trying to overcome the training or the training that we've had as gardeners that everything needs to be a lawn. So it just I think that as a group that we can do that. I also do a lot of Facebook work that's saying, "Oh, look, here's my native plant, and look how beautiful this is." So I think it's a education, and that's one of the reasons that we give away that PowerPoint, so that people can use it to talk to their local people. And yeah, we just have to keep doing it. On the other side of that, sometimes native plants are mandated now by organizations. The communities are saying, well, for new developments there has to be this many native plants, and so there's been blowback. And so I think that because a lot of people in the landscaping industry are feeling a bit uncomfortable that natives, which don't need to be bought every 3 months, are making a stand, that there has been a lot of blowback. And it's important for us to talk about natives, because the industry that produces all those pretty on the shelf flowers that we're supposed to plant every 3 months is very strong. So we need to be stronger.
That actually ties into just a quick follow-up question. I know other people want to ask questions. Have you given talks to landscapers themselves? Is any of them receptive to learning more about natives and how they might plant them and take care of them?
What I have done is, and actually they contacted me, was the landscape architecture department at the University of Florida. And so now that would probably be the place to start, is if you have a local university, talk to the landscape architecture people, because they are now beginning to train the landscapers to be in how important natives are.
Great. Gail, I see you've had your hand up for a minute. Go ahead and come off of mute and ask away.
Oh, I was just looking for the second website that was under the greengardeningmatters.com, because it was blocked by a little something on this meeting.
ClimateWiseLandscaping.com.
Oh, thanks a lot.
All right. Kathy Daniel, I see you're on your iPhone, so you can't necessarily raise a hand, but you are asking about it. Do you want to go ahead and come off of mute?
Oh, thank you. My question is, I have a friend who lives in an HOA in Florida, and I am luckily up in Maryland. And we now have a law saying that HOAs cannot make us have a lawn. Her HOA actually requires St. Augustinian grass. And I don't know if I can tell her, well, just don't poison it, don't water it. I mean, I don't know if HOAs, if they go crazy, if something's growing in your grass. What can she do to kind of, besides pushing back? She doesn't want to do the whole advocacy thing that I do. She's just more timid. And so she's not going to work in her whole community like I do. But I just want her to be able to work in her yard, get her yard better.
Well, actually in Florida, there is a Florida-friendly landscaping law as well. It says that no one can prevent you from having a Florida-friendly landscape. So is it enforced? Not as much as it should be, but there is a law that does that. So the community could be informed of that. And it's the Florida Friendly Landscaping Law.
Great. Thank you.
Mhm.
Awesome. All right. And then we've got one question over here in the chat from Elizabeth Erickson. Do you have a handout about why it isn't helpful to use any kind of landscape fabric for weed suppression? I need some well put together information about the scientific reason not to use this.
No, but that's a good idea. I should write an article so it's out there. But again, I think that on Linda Chalker Scott, she does cover this on informedgardener.com. There's a huge amount of information that she has with science and gardening and horticultural myths. And so there's all kinds of things there that we have been trained to do one thing, and she says, wait a minute, it was shown 100 years ago that putting rocks in the bottom of your container will actually impede drainage. It won't help. That kind of thing.
That's awesome. Maybe we should look into having you write another article for Into the Weeds next quarter. Susan Flint, I see that we have got a hand for you.
Hi, Ginny, thank you so much. This is great. I did have a question for you. So my parents live in Connecticut. I'm in Massachusetts. And my dad was so excited because he's like, they just passed a law that you can only plant natives if you're doing any new plantings in the town. And I was like, I'm like, that seems pretty strict.
Yeah.
But what I was wondering is, like, would you advocate that? Or as a designer, I feel like I need to have some flexibility. So what I'd like to use is things that will do what natives do, but are at a size that people can put them in their yards. Because, inevitably the straight species are, 15 feet tall and 15 feet wide, and it just doesn't fit in a small land, small piece of property. But if I could use either a nativar or a cultivar that has fertile flowers, that does not have different colored, stems or leaves, so we're not shying away the pollinators. Does it do the same thing, or should I really be trying to stick with straight species?
Yeah, if you read Doug Tallamy, the problem with nativars, according to him and his work with caterpillars, is that the nativars sort of leave the caterpillars out of the argument. That, yeah, the pollinators would be fine, but if it does not support the caterpillars, then the birds won't have enough to eat. And so that is that problem. But again, I think that we need to rethink our landscapes on how we do them, so that instead of planting something that's too big, I mean, planting shrubs as foundation plants is ridiculously bad because the shrubs always outgrow the space. Why aren't we planting bunching grasses as foundation shrubs? They don't have woody roots. They're not going to disturb the foundation. They're not going to outgrow their spaces. They look nice all year round. And why not have bunching grasses as the default foundation plant? So our traditions of what we're supposed to do in our yard are not the ones that are going to be the ones that are easiest to take care of. They're the ones that are the most practical for the developer to put in. And that's like the lone tree in the middle of the lawn. That's a ridiculous default landscape for us, is that there'd be one tree in the middle of a yard all by itself with lawn all around it. And that's, I do have a sketch that I did in one of my illustrator did of a what you would plant around the tree to make a habitat around the tree. So what's easy for the developer to put in is not necessarily what's going to be easy to take care of in the long run.
Thank you.
All right, any more questions?
But I just want to urge everyone to get out into your community and work on getting some of the climate-wise solutions out into the community, into the schoolyards, into the churchyards. It's not just for homeowners, it's for whole communities. And we can really make a difference because there's so many of us.
All right, and then I do see we got one last hand that went up. We're going to go ahead and take that question, and then we're going to call it in the interest of time, as we are scheduled to 1 o'clock. So let's take one last quick question, and then we will go on with our days. And that is, I'm sorry that this is very clearly not your name, but it is the screen name listed. Confidential Mail, you raised a hand. Go ahead and come off of mute. All right, I will take that as a fluke hand raise then. So thank you all so very much for joining us today. Ginny, thank you so much for your fantastic content and your poignant statements. We are ending